What if you could walk through New York? Not the New York of skyscrapers and yellow cabs and 8 million people, but the New York of 400 years ago. What if you could stand on the southern tip of Manhattan Island and see what was there before Wall Street, before Broadway, before Central Park, before everything that makes New York the most recognizable city on earth? What if the island that would become the most valuable piece of real estate in human history was still covered in ancient forest, its shores lined with oyster beds so vast that early European explorers described them as almost unbelievable, its rivers teeming with fish, its skies dark with migrating birds? This is New York, the 1600s, and it looks nothing like anything you have ever imagined. Because in the early 1600s, Manhattan Island is not a city, it is not even a settlement. It is a wild, extraordinarily beautiful island at the mouth of a great river, inhabited by the Lenape people, who have lived here for thousands of years, and it is about to be discovered, purchased, settled, and transformed by a sequence of events so unlikely and so consequential that they will ultimately produce the greatest city the modern world has ever seen. Today, we are going to watch it happen from the very beginning. Before we can understand what New York became, we need to understand what it was. Manhattan in the early 1600s is home to the Lenape people, a confederacy of Algonquian-speaking communities who have inhabited this landscape for at least 10,000 years. They call the island Mannahatta, the island of many hills, and hills it has. The Manhattan of the early 1600s is an extraordinarily varied landscape, nothing like the flat grid of streets we know today. The island has over 50 freshwater ponds and streams. It has dense forests of chestnut, oak, and hickory covering its central and northern sections. It has salt marshes along its eastern shore. It has rocky outcroppings and steep ridges running north to south along its spine. The Lenape live in this landscape with extraordinary sophistication. They are not nomads, they have permanent villages, seasonal agricultural fields where they grow corn, beans, and squash, and an intimate knowledge of every resource the island provides. The waters surrounding Manhattan are among the most productive in the world. The oyster beds in the harbour are so enormous, some individual oysters growing to 30 centimeters long, that they form natural reefs visible from the surface of the water. The Lenape have a word for what Europeans would call ownership of land. They do not have it. In Lenape culture, land cannot be owned. It can be used, shared, stewarded, but it belongs to no one. This fundamental difference in worldview will have catastrophic consequences. The European encounter with Manhattan begins in September 1609. An English explorer named Hudson, sailing under a Dutch flag in a small vessel called the Half Moon, enters the great harbour at the mouth of the river that will eventually bear his name. Hudson is looking for the Northwest Passage, a sea route to Asia that does not exist. What he finds instead is almost as valuable. Imagine the scene from the deck of the Half Moon as it sails into New York Harbor for the very first time. The harbor is enormous, one of the finest natural harbors in the world. On the left, the wooded hills of what will become Brooklyn and Staten Island. Ahead, the narrow channel between the bay and the upper harbor, and beyond that channel, the extraordinary sight of Manhattan Island, its forested ridges rising above the harbor, a waterfall visible on the western shore, the smoke of Lenape cooking fires rising from the tree line. Hudson sails up the river, eventually reaching as far north as present-day Albany, and returns to report that the river valley is the most beautiful and fertile land he has ever seen. His report will bring the Dutch. In 1624, 15 years after Hudson's voyage, the Dutch West India Company establishes the first permanent European settlement on Manhattan Island. They call it New Amsterdam. The first settlers, 30 families, mostly Walloon Protestant refugees from what is now Belgium, land on the southern tip of Manhattan Island in the spring of 1624. They find a landscape of extraordinary beauty and abundance. The harbour teems with fish, the forests are full of game, the river provides fresh water, the soil is fertile. They begin to build. The New Amsterdam of the 1620s and 1630s is a tiny, chaotic, extraordinarily diverse settlement clinging to the very southern tip of Manhattan Island. A few dozen wooden houses, a windmill on the shore, a small wooden fort, Fort Amsterdam at the very tip of the island facing the harbour, a church, a tavern, a company storehouse. By 1626, there are perhaps 300 people living in New Amsterdam, and in that same year occurs one of the most famous real estate transactions in history. In 1626, the Dutch West India Company's director, a man named Peter Miniot, purchases Manhattan Island from the Lenape for trade goods worth 60 guilders. 60 guilders, traditionally described as $24, the most famous bargain in history. Except it was not quite what it seemed. The Lenape who accepted the trade goods almost certainly did not understand the transaction as a sale. In their worldview, land cannot be sold. They were almost certainly agreeing to share the use of the land, a concept completely familiar to them, not surrendering ownership of it forever. The catastrophic misunderstanding between two completely different concepts of land and ownership, one based on individual property rights, the other on collective stewardship, will define the entire subsequent history of European settlement in North America. But in 1626, in New Amsterdam, the consequences of that misunderstanding are still in the future, and the tiny settlement on the southern tip of Manhattan Island is growing. By the 1640s, New Amsterdam has become something genuinely remarkable. It is still tiny by European standards, perhaps 1,000 people by 1650, but it is already one of the most diverse places on Earth. The Dutch West India Company has brought settlers from across Europe and beyond: Dutch, Flemish, Walloon, German, Scandinavian, Portuguese, English. There are free African settlers who have been in New Amsterdam since the 1620s, owning land and participating in civic life. There are 18 languages spoken in the streets of New Amsterdam in 1640. 18 languages in a town of a few hundred people on the tip of a wild island. The diversity of New York was not invented in the 20th century. It was there from the very beginning. The streets of New Amsterdam in the 1640s are unpaved and often muddy. Pigs and goats wander freely. The houses are Dutch in style, narrow brick facades with stepped gable roofs facing the street, their interiors surprisingly comfortable and well furnished by the standards of frontier settlements. The Dutch bring their domestic culture with them: tiled fireplaces, linen tablecloths, painted pottery, the havage of cleanliness that will always distinguish Dutch households from their English neighbours. Along the waterfront, the most important part of the settlement, wooden docks extend into the harbour where ships from Amsterdam, Curaçao, Brazil and the Caribbean unload their cargo. The fur trade is the economic engine of New Amsterdam. Beaver pelts, essential for fashionable felt hats for English gentlemen, flow down the Hudson River from the interior and out through New Amsterdam to Amsterdam and the markets of Europe. In 1653, the Dutch build a wall. Not a particularly impressive wall, a wooden palisade running across the width of Manhattan Island from the East River to the Hudson River. Its purpose is defensive. The Dutch are nervous about both the English colonies to the north and the possibility of attack from the sea. The wall is never tested in battle. It is torn down by the British after they took New Amsterdam in 1664. But the street that runs along the line of that wall, Wall Street, will become the most famous financial address in the world. In 1664, 4 British warships sail into New Amsterdam Harbour and demand its surrender. The Dutch Director General, the famously cantankerous Peter Stuyvesant with a mooden leg from a cannonball wound suffered in a Caribbean battle, wants to fight. His colonists do not. They are tired of his authoritarian rule and frankly not particularly attached to Dutch sovereignty. New Amsterdam surrenders without a shot being fired. It is renamed New York in honor of the Duke of York, the future King James II of England, whose expedition has just seized it. The Dutch period is over, but it has left its mark forever.
The layout of the streets, the diversity of the population, the commercial culture, the habit of tolerance, all of it Dutch in origin, all of it permanent. Standing at the southern tip of Manhattan today, looking out over the harbor from Battery Park, it requires an extraordinary act of imagination to see what was there 400 years ago. The oyster beds, the Lenape fishing weirs, the forests covering the hills of the island to the north, the small wooden Dutch settlement clinging to the very tip of the island with its windmill and its fort and its 18 languages. And yet, the continuities are real. The street pattern of Lower Manhattan still follows the irregular paths of the original Dutch settlement, hence the contrast between the chaotic streets south of Fulton Street and the perfect grid of the city to the north. The diversity that defines New York today, its identity as a city that belongs to everyone and to no one, was there in the Dutch settlement from the very beginning. 18 languages in a town of a few hundred people. The commercial instinct, the idea that New York is above all a place where business is done, deals are made, and fortunes change hands, was there in the Dutch fur traders and their beaver pelts. New York did not become the city it is by accident. It became what it is because of what it was. Because of the Lenape, who knew this island for 10,000 years. Because of the Dutch, who saw its commercial potential and built their improbable little settlement on its southern tip. Because of the extraordinary diversity of people who came here from the very beginning and never stopped coming. The city that never sleeps was dreamed here, in the 1600s, on this island. And now, you have seen where it all began. If New York came alive for you today, hit subscribe, because next week we go somewhere equally extraordinary.